Hello, my name is Kashima. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Today, I'm here to share some data from an underdocumented part of the world of high linguistic diversity, that of Papua New Guinea. Data from New Guinea expands our global data points of different types of attested multilingual situations. It is my contention that this southern New Guinean case study from the Moorhead area expands our understanding of what is or was possible in terms of societal and individual multilingualism, which in and of itself can be taken in many different research directions. In this talk, I suggest that the community of Karaki tribes people fits quite closely to suggestions made in the mid to late 20th century regarding New Guinea's pre-colonial language ecology. That is, societal multilingualism was common for many New Guinean communities, in part due to demographic and practical considerations on the one hand, and for symbolic reasons on the other. The type of multilingualism of the communities, as well as the domains of multilingual practices, demonstrates a pragmatism that is quite logical given the sociocultural context. In order to contextualize the findings from the Moorhead area, I'd like to situate it in terms of suggestions made about the pre-colonial New Guinean situation and in terms of language ecology. The first part of this talk will be an outline and summary of the reconstructions made about pre-colonial New Guinea from the works mainly by Gillian Sankoff in the 1970s. To the best of my knowledge, her work remains the first and arguably best attempt at collating observations on New Guinean multilingualism to synthesize an aerial impression of small-scale multilingualism, insofar as there are aerial characteristics of such a phenomena. The second part of the talk will be presentations of the situation in southern New Guinea, more specifically from the Kiraki Ngambla speakers of the Moorhead area of the South Fly district. The data were collected from my PhD dissertation, and what is presented here today is a summary and reframing of my own work against the reconstruction made by Sankoff. By the end of the talk, you'll see that my observations fit with Sankoff's reconstructions broadly, but of course this raises further questions. Before beginning, I'd like to clarify the metaphorical sense in which I use the term language ecology. Following Blackledger's definition, I use the expression language ecology metaphorically to mean the relationships between languages and their speakers and language and societal structures, which are subject to their social, political, and historical contexts. So Sankoff's reconstruction of pre-colonial societal multilingualism draws from qualitative and quantitative data from secondary ethnographic sources collected between the 1950s and 70s predominantly, and she also uses her own work and experience, fieldwork, in the Huon Peninsula in the 1960s. The quantitative data is mainly concerned with speaker numbers and demographic facts, whilst the qualitative data is predominantly based on ethnographic reports. These reports come from not only linguists, but from anthropologists and missionary workers. And the map that you see in the slide shows the approximate locations of Sankoff's data sources, and the size of the ellipses purely for visibility purposes, and the approximate geographic spread of where the speakers of these languages are based, rather than accurate scaling representation of a parameter such as population size. As an observation, most of the language communities that Sankoff refers to in her reconstruction are Trans-New Guinean languages, so those are Papuan languages, rather than Austronesian languages. Sankoff noted a difference in the type of multilingual situations being described depending on the number of speakers of a language. So she notes, she roughly breaks up the types into very small with fewer than 1,000 speakers, small and the mid-range languages, and with the very large languages over 30,000 speakers. She notes that the observations for the very small languages, that is with fewer than 1,000 speakers, the communities seem to be multilingual by necessity, that individuals had high levels of multilingualism due to the sheer necessity of needing to get along with and communicate and interact with other language groups, people who speak other languages more predominantly for a variety of reasons. She relays that no reports of sex differences were observed in multilingual abilities from locations in the East and West Sepik and around the Madang area, or in Madang province, should I say. Of the other languages, so that is of the small, mid-range and large languages, Sankoff noted that, quote, very roughly, it appears that there has existed a fair amount of bilingualism in border areas and among the smaller or more isolated segments of any linguistic group, but that multilingualism is unlikely in the central areas of large linguistic groups. So in other words, for these groups, aside from the very small type, that we were likely to find societal multilingualism, individual multilingualism on the border areas of the geographical distribution. Sankoff identifies two domains where multilingualism appears to have been very prevalent. So one is the space of marriage, where you have active or passive forms of multilingualism. So she observes from the reports that intermarriage with groups that spoke different languages seemed to have been a virtual necessity for the members of those very small language groups of under 1,000 speakers. Marriages occurred across language groups, particularly in border areas with larger languages, where linguistic differences didn't seem to constitute a barrier to marriage for those language groups over 1,000 speakers. Trade being a domain of active multilingualism rather than that of passive multilingualism. And unlike the very small languages where you didn't have reports of sex differentiation in multilingual abilities, it was observed that for these languages with more than 1,000 speakers, in the domain of trade, there did seem to be a sex bias in favour of men with respect to bilingualism, that men would be bilingual in the languages spoken in the villages that they traded with. This is likely a reflection of trade being a domain where men were more active than women, and the sex bias in multilingual ability being a reflection of that. Sankoff suggests that there may have been a lot of passive bilingualism in pre-colonial New Guinea, possibly so because of the dialect chain characteristics of New Guinean languages. So the passive bilingualism, the ability to understand the language that's being spoken to you, which you may not yourself be able to speak, but it's difficult to tease apart the origins or the reasons for the passive bilingualism. It could be because of the dialect chain characteristics that one is able to comprehend what's being said because it is a closely related language. Or the passive bilingualism could be because one grew up speaking that language themselves, for example, and the dialect chain characteristics makes it difficult to tease this apart. Sankoff also suggests that multilingualism was highly valued in the area, in pre-colonial New Guinea. This is based on observations that come from the highlands, but also based on her own work with Buang Mapo speakers in the Huon Gulf. So here is a simple summary of Sankoff's main points. I won't read through these in the interest of time, and we will revisit these at the end of the talk when we compare it against the data I collected in southern New Guinea. Sankoff's reconstruction can best be summarised and characterised by her own words shown in the final dot point. Quote, "It would appear that the best reconstruction we can make of the pre-colonial sociolinguistic situation is one in which the basic relationship of language and dialect was a socially symmetric one. Language was viewed as being essentially pragmatic, a means to communicate with natural or supernatural beings, whether local or foreign. People learned and used language as a function of their personal exposure and interest." Now we'll move on to the second part of the talk, presenting the case study from southern New Guinea, more specifically from the Morehead area. So this map shows the southern part of the island of New Guinea, which is sometimes called the belly of the bird, and you may see faintly in the map that there is a geographic border running north to south. So on the western side you have Indonesia, and on the eastern side you have the nation of Papua New Guinea. The orange area you see is where the Yam family, speakers of the Yam family are distributed, roughly geographically speaking, and that's our target area. So this southern area of Papua New Guinea will limit, since the Kiraki Nambu speakers are on the Papuan side, have managed to retain many aspects of its pre-colonial language ecology due to the relatively recent presence of colonial influence in the mid-late 20th century. To this day, Morehead is remote from the administrative centre, and only now are some speakers gradually incorporating Tok Pisin into their linguistic repertoires. So this makes the Morehead area one of the few places on Earth where we can still somewhat study the dynamics of a pre-colonial New Guinea. In other words, it gives us an opportunity to document the dynamics of a multilingual language ecology without the influence of megalanguages, of modern megalanguages, let's say. Now let's zoom into the Morehead area. On the map, you can see dots, and I've coloured out the areas where Nambo is predominantly spoken. So each dot represents a village, and we have two colours here, the brighter orange and the paler orange, which I'll talk about as I introduce the Nambo speech community. So the Kiraki tribes people describe themselves as owners of the Nambo language. So the moniker of Nambo speaker reflects this in part. So Nambo is a Yam language, formerly known as the Morehead Upper Maro family. It's part of the Nambu branch, confusingly. And within the Nambu branch of languages, we have about 6 languages identified and classified. Within Nambo, we have 2 tribal dialects. So we have Kiraki Nambo on the one hand and Yardane Nambo on the other hand. So the map there, the dense orange, shows the villages that the Kiraki Nambo speakers are predominantly based, and the paler orange are the villages that belong to the Yardane Nambo speakers. So Since the moniker of Nambo speaker is associated with a tribal identity, we may say that the emblematic speakers of Nambo, you've got about 1,000, but the total number of speakers of Kiraki Nambo is much higher because it is a multilingual area. So that there's really no good way to estimate the total number of speakers, but probably at least double the number of emblematic speakers. This is an area of low population density with approximately 0.5 persons per square kilometre. It's a flat area with where physical mobility is quite high during the dry seasons, a little bit more complicated during the wet, but people do travel around relatively frequently in the area. The summary of the data presented here were collected by myself based on fieldwork, 8 months total, conducted between 2014 and 2017, with stays ranging from 2 weeks in a very short year and 2 months at the longest. That's based on participant observation as well as more structured interviews. So we conducted multilingualism interviews with 32 speakers, getting a balance of men and women, and tried to get a balance of age groups with the youngest speaker aged in their early 20s. The analysis here involves some data collected by pilot study on a perceptual dialectological study, but that was just based on 5 speakers. And the data collection was conducted by myself, but also very heavily involved members of the Kiraki, locally formed Kiraki Language Committee. All interviews were conducted by Kiraki Nambo speakers, speaking to other Kiraki Nambo speakers, and the interviews were all conducted in Nambo. The Kiraki Nambo speech community indeed exhibits high degrees of multilingualism, and people express pride in their language differences and dialect differences in the area. The exact language repertoire of individuals is highly dependent on biography, but people will typically speak languages of neighbouring locales and their mother's language, so we're looking at least 5 languages spoken or understood. The importance of language in terms of identity is something that has been observed by anthropologists who've worked in the area in the 20th century. Mary Ayres goes as far to say that the language difference manifests group identity. When you ask Kiraki Nambo speakers about other languages in the area, people will point out lexical and phonological differences. This is unsurprising. And we could say that there's some evidence that linguistic loyalty is quite strong in the area. So a variationist study, which I conducted looking at phonological change in one variable, having a look at the speech of Kiraki Nambo women who've married out into the neighbouring Nen village, they are participating in the change in progress, patterning quite closely to other members of the speech community who have not left the Nambo villages that they grow up in. So this is something that could be investigated also further, this point of linguistic loyalty. People will talk about language as something essential, as a property of the Kiraki tribe. They speak of being owners of the Kiraki language. And we even find individuals with complex language biographies who may not have spoken Nambo as a dominant language in their youth or in their childhood. They'll still express Nambo as being their language. This point about the association of tribe and language may be something that's particular to Kiraki Nambo speakers. So Mary Ayres, who worked a bit further west from where Kiraki Nambo speakers are based, she found that the people further west didn't really use tribal names when speaking about themselves. But she noted that the Karakia were the one exception, so that Nambo speakers did seem to have this label of Kiraki, this tribal label, if that's even the correct term, as something that was very significant to them. Marriage is a major domain of active multilingualism. We don't have a clear picture on trade, exchange, and the role of language in relationship building at this stage, so I'll limit the discussion to marriage. There's a strong preference of marrying someone outside one's village of origin, although this is not the stated defining criteria of choosing a spouse. The main criteria of choosing a spouse is whether they belong to an eligible marriage group, known as a section in the ethnographic literature of the area. Now, given that all Nambo villages neighbour at least 2 villages associated with other Nambo branch languages, there is a high probability that one's spouse will speak a language other than their own Nambo language as the language of choice in daily life. Having said so, the villages in the geographic centre of the Nambo language village chain are flanked by 2 other Nambo-speaking villages, as you can see in that little inlay of the map there with the 3 villages running from north to south. So if you are from this central village, if you're a man from the central village, you are more likely to marry another Kiraki Nambu speaker compared to men from the northern and the southern villages. And this was found to be the case upon investigating the language profiles of married couples in the central village of Bevdoven. 80% of households had a Nambo couple, compared to the village of Govav, where only 24% of households had a Nambo couple. You can see this in the pie chart, with the pie chart on the left showing the figures for Bevdoven, the central village, and the one on the right for the northern village of Govav. So this gives the village of Govav perhaps a more multilingual profile compared to that of Bevdoven. And this follows Sankoff's suggestion that it is the border communities of language groups that are more multilingual than the geographic centre. Another suggestion of Sankoff's, which is borne out in this area, pertains to smaller languages being highly multilingual by necessity. The neighbouring Nen-speaking village of Bimarvan, just 10 kilometres east of this Kirakinambu area, is a single village language, meaning that there are about 250 emblematic speakers, all originating from that one village. While I can't present the data on Bimarvan here, I can say that the village profile of multilingualism in this Nen-speaking village is more diverse than that of Govav village shown here. And finally, marriage appears to be a domain of active multilingualism at least some of the time, due to the fact that women will often speak their own tribal variety to their children. People express linguistic loyalty towards their language, and the women who do marry in or marry out of their village of origin, depending on your perspective, will continue to speak their language in daily life. All adult Kiraki Number speakers who have a mother marrying in from a non-Kiraki area will report being able to speak their mother's language, and are often very happy to demonstrate their ability by relaying a short story or two. There are individual differences between women, but it is very common for in-marrying women to actively speak their husband's language. Kiraki Number speakers report what can be taken as both active and passive forms of multilingualism. We've got local, here's a collection of some commonly used expressions when people are talking about their language repertoires. On the one hand, you have expressions like Yandinawaptan, I speak it, Moyatwum, I know it, to express how confident they are in speaking a particular language. Then you have more nuanced grades, for example, not long words, Yautomba FEV, Ngangotan, I can reply, for example, but these are still within the realm of speaking other varieties. And then you have expressions such as I can hear it, the implication being I can't speak it, Yentnayaretan. And then we also have expressions of complete non-comprehension, Mavnyawum, Dodofiviwum. Interestingly, Gillian Sankoff noted when she worked with the Buang Mapo speakers that Buang Mapo speakers will use expressions of non-comprehension basically when they were talking about languages that didn't belong to their own language family. Impressionistically speaking, I think Nambo speakers only use these expressions of non-comprehension when asked about, say, the Idi language, a Pakatora River language spoken not too far from this area. This will be interesting to investigate further. The point of valuing multilingualism as something important is a little bit difficult for me to say with a lot of confidence. I feel there were very few explicit statements saying, yes, being able to speak lots of languages is a good thing. It felt more like multilingualism was something very natural for people in the area. It was assumed as something that everybody spoke lots of different languages, that this was a particular fact of living in the area. But the fact that people do seem to learn languages even later in life suggests that it is positively evaluated, at least that it's not negatively evaluated. We can say that with at least some confidence. So we have reports where women who have married out of a Nambo-speaking area into an Nen-speaking area, talking about how other Nambo speakers in the Nen-speaking area would help them learn words from Nen. We also have reports where people say, I've learnt the Suki language because the Bible school was there and I lived there for a while, so I speak the Suki language, and that's an unrelated language. That's a Trans-New Guinea language spoken much further north than the Moorhead area. And we also find that church services and these official circumstances, people will typically speak in Numbal, but translations are sometimes offered in other languages. Church-affiliated events like fellowships, speakers will tend to make announcements and sermons in their own emblematic language, their tribal language, but will occasionally translate into other languages that they are capable of. It will be interesting to have a look more systematically at the choice of languages used in such situations to see whether there is something a bit more systematic. So we broadly find that the Karaki Nampo situation from southern New Guinea fits Sankoff's reconstructions of the pre-colonial multilingual language ecology of New Guinea. Part of the Kiraki Nampo situation seems to mirror the reconstruction and observations from other parts of New Guinea very well. For example, that marriages are multilingual, with language border area communities appearing more multilingual than non-border communities. Both passive and active forms of multilingualism appear to be a feature, with the active forms based on exposure and speaking languages to relatives or for church. As we would expect, however, there are caveats to the yeses. For example, the expressions of valuing multilingualism in the Kiraki Nampo case qualitatively feel different to those reports from the highlands, which Sankoff refers to in her reconstructions. This case study from southern New Guinea is very much a first sketch and raises quite a large number of questions. For example, complementing the self-reports with actual observations of multilingual interactions will enrich the picture greatly. This study takes the perspective of Kiraki Nampo speakers exclusively as a first launching point. But for example, we have not considered the perspective of the Yarne Nambo dialect speakers or those of the in-marrying women who are not Kiraki. What are their perspectives of languages, of the language ecology, and what does this contribute and tell us about small-scale multilingualism here in the Moorhead area, but also more broadly? And finally, from a macro sociolinguistic typological perspective, one wonders whether Sankoff's reconstructions are too general. In the interest of time, I have, of course, greatly simplified Sankoff's reconstruction, but is this greatly different to other parts of the world with small-scale multilingual language ecologies? And at a more fundamental level, is it possible to compare across different parts of the world? And if so, how do we do this in a principled way? I hope this Southern New Guinea case study of Kiraki Nampo speakers has contributed to the emergent field of small-scale multilingualism studies, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments